flux for 20 years. And superintendents are expected to play pivotal roles in navigating the turbulence and leading the change to optimize students' learning and student outcomes. But the state's federal control of education systems has been increased by mechanisms of accountability made possible by data management introduced with PISA. But what PONS identifies is data management governance by numbers doesn't reflect or recognize individual lives, and that each human being can be readily replaced by a string of exam results, a kind of a DNA coding that, coupled with the postcode, can predict or even determine the trajectory of a lived life. So decentralization of power, so the school boards can give autonomy to the superintendents, which seems to reduce the central control. However, the main change has been a loss of bureaucratic systems that were actually quite important for knowledge transfer, knowledge exchange, and cascading. So the main problem is the communication lines between assessment of students' learning and their feedback, which seeks to reduce unpredictability through standardization, which is undermining culturally relevant learning, which is unpredictable and complex. So Ford and Erker are saying governance by the school board is understood as mission to optimize academic outcomes, policy at academic, administrative and fiscal levels, and administration, which is the implementation of the policies to deliver on the mission. And another dimension is management of instruction and assessment for learning, which the school board can attempt to manipulate, but ultimately attendant and her or his principals and staff implement these policies of text on a day-to-day basis through policy discourse in the classrooms. So drawing from Carol Collins' IR's work and Walletta Brookins, when we did research with superintendents in the US, we found that school boards in executing their duties may be dysfunctional and or change, resulting in high superintendent turnover, despite the superintendents meeting their targets to raise exam scores. So I'm drawing on this research that focuses on women of colour because there are estimated 45,672,250 Black residents in the US, but this number is smaller than the Hispanic population, but a lot of the Hispanic population are identifying as white and therefore need to be the focus of a separate study. Also, there's a dearth of qualitative research on women of colour and how they have autonomy in decision-making positions in education systems, and particularly on their role as top chief executives of an education system. So one superintendent said, I was asked a question when I interviewed coming into the superintendency 15 years ago by the board president. He asked me, did I think that a school district could become strong enough that it could influence a community and the direction that community was going, and a stabilized community? He asked me if I thought a school district, even in the face of some of the things going on nationally, if a school district could establish its own standards and those of the community. Coming out of Chicago, I said no, absolutely no. I see now, and I see that based on the fact that we have stopped movement out of the community because people want their children to be in a school district, I understand the complexity of community, the whole community, and their relationship as a school district and their relationship with me. I have the same responsibility to nurture, teach, and be involved with the community as I have with my staff. Having said that, that is the reason my schedule is structured so that if there is an activity that occurs after school that is parent community present, not only because I'm laying eyes on, but I am present because of the fact that I realize that if the African American community specifically, we have a need to identify with a persons that we feel has a connection to our children. One of the reasons over time in less violence and disruptive behavior here is because I believe our values have permeated and people began to understand what we understand. There is a threat to the African American middle class that is real. It is real. And I know that others look at it in another way. The only reason our men are violent and they misbehave is because they have lost hope. The reason families are so splintered is because they have lost hope. They have lost hope in many different reasons. Who do they turn to if they feel their child is not getting a good education? They don't have the resources to put their child in a private school. You can't test into alternative schools, selective enrollment schools. Parents don't have the money to send their kids to college, yet they know that is the pattern for success. So national actors need the same kind of bridges between the national and the district levels, and superintendents can become these bridges and need to promote learning how to learn so that their students will learn how to learn, be culturally sensitive, ask good questions, problem solve as young societal innovators for equity and renewal, and participate in grassroots up civic engagement that propels cultures. Superintendents can put this knowledge to action in science with and for society databases and with proof of concept to build capacity for empowering young societal innovators with A, B, C, D, E. So A is asking good questions, B, searching the best that's been thought and said from different perspectives, C, to gather data, D, change strategies are developed with proof of concept, and then identifying emerging principles that will have the back of people because they will align with the rule of law and human rights. So to bring hope to communities at district level, as I sum up, barriers and opportunities for district actors who can bridge between national educational offers and local market demands needs to be facilitated as professionals, as superintendents with autonomy, and not as politics. Professionals can efficiently mobilise social policy and district funding to empower and monitor school autonomy, not be overwhelmed by it, but this needs to empower young societal innovators for equity and renewal to propel the local entrepreneurial economies for economic and social well-being that deliver national strategic plans. And it currently remains unclear how optimising exam results in home language, maths and science measured by people for anything other than becoming college eligible. And only 2 to 5% of all US graduates went to elite universities. The alumni of those schools have been dominating the Time 100. Specifically, they have comprised anywhere from about 30 to 50% of the Time 100 list. So our key issue is how do we bring school autonomy with assessment for learning that is culturally relevant, that is formative, that is feed forward, and that actually gives the young people the competencies they need to be able to live good lives and develop local entrepreneurial economies, small, medium, micro, mom and pop shops, so that they can turn subjective dreams to concrete realities and still deliver the national strategy through superintendents who are agents who bridge between national education offers but the local needs, and through professional educators and administrators' committees of empowerment that feed up from rich qualitative school data to quantitative national and state policy. So this is the project that Khalid, ARAR and I have been looking at with Science with and for Society with ABCDE to empower young societal innovators for equity and renewal. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Alison, being strict about time. And now we'll have questions at the end, but I would like to give this opportunity to Professor ARAR. Is it you who is going now?
Thanks, Professor Mohammed. Yeah, I see that Charles is not getting in, so yeah. And thank you, Alison, for this well thought and well structured presentation. Thank you. So, okay. So my presentation, this presentation is gonna revolve around 3 different comparative studies. Same as Alison has done, you know, we gain our deeper understanding throughout multi-layered and multi-levels of studies, not just, you know, a one-based study. Well, I want to connect dealing with school autonomy while handling the recent challenges that schooling system and schools as a state agencies has been facing. One of the global challenges that schools have been facing is the migration and diversity. So migration has been increased in the last decade, and also racism. And I'm giving here just one example, the Black Lives Matter, but racism at general has been also increased, and the pandemic that all education system in the globe has been facing. So this brings us to the question of centralization, this decentralization of education system. Can we still deliver education throughout a centralized system and mechanism and structure, especially in the pandemic area, or there is a need of shift to autonomy, ecosystems, and community harmonized schooling? So this is one of the questions that I want to put in the fore. While education systems throughout 3 different revolutions, one is the Industrial Revolution, the other one is the Knowledge Revolution, and the third one is the Digital Revolution. They have been driven mainly and driven by reforms and another reforms. Yet we see that education system within the reform realm, there's still lack of scientific theoretical foundation for education, lack of suitable response for human diversity, the learner's mechanical perceptions as if students were, you know, tabula rasa, and intention to the significance of child development. We still use different terms of effectiveness, benchmarks, standardized tests. So these terms belongs to the Industrial Revolution, while other systems got rid of this and ignoring new 21st century knowledge agent, and of course, insufficient attention to globalization and anachronistic models of education and employees training. So how education system with this rigid regime can deliver and can mobilize students in the 21st century by paying attention to education science and especially to the learner, because schools are about learners, by paying attention to pedagogy in a technological area, and by paying attention to human diversity. And the following questions are posed, which we can sum up with asking questions about the structure of education system and the validity of this structure and the control of education system. So the different remedies that have been, that we have been witnessed in the last 100 years since first creation of this human public education system were of reform, either budgeting or more of technologies use or curriculum changes. But if we look back globally, we see that we have been shifting and system has been shifting throughout 3 different revolutions. The one is the industrial, the scientific, and the knowledge-based society. And within this, the digital area. While education system has been back in the back and not leading in this knowledge growth society. We still speak about curriculum. We still speak about the validity of curriculum. While we spoke in the last 50 years about like a 10 years curriculum, now we cannot speak about a 1 year curriculum. If we spoke about core curriculum, what is core? What is core about? And if we spoke about bridging the achievement gap, which gaps are? Gap is still there. Do I need a student innated with musical hobbies or instruments to be excellent in mathematics? Do I really need that? Do I really need to infuse this closing gap? While the gap will still there since the 1930 Harvard research until now, the gap is still there. So we are shifting to learning, guided teaching, learning, analytic. And where are education systems? Do we need to ask students to remember materials while we speak about big data analysis? Or do we need to equip them with, analysis skills? So these are among the big questions. If we look here to the human diversity as being, exampled in PISA results, and this, 79 countries of 15 ages. So we see that the gap exists. A gap exists in these all, systems, which means the conclusion is revisiting education system to meet the current and future needs. Do we need this centralized policy? And can we arrive with centralized policy to the changes that we need? Erasing the aim of closing the achievement gap that exists in all education policy reports, as it is non-achievable or needed. And the recognition of human diversity, both in education, exposes the education community to different serious challenges in meeting cultural and personal needs that demands. And of course, we need of, especially after the pandemic, of flexible organizations of teaching to meet different demands, and getting the understanding of ecosystem, exploring the background of the learners, their needs and their context, and how we can gain further effects. So what are the main questions, and who should control our education? Within this understanding, we conducted 3 different research on school autonomy and teachers agency. The first research comprised of 25 schools, while 12 of them were conventional schools and the other were autonomous schools. The other research has been based only on autonomous schools. And the third research done in the pandemic to understand the needs of schools in the pandemic area in terms of educational leadership and policy implementation, whether it's centralized or decentralized. So if you can look to the above model, school-based management increased teachers' commitment and motivation. So, and of course, effectiveness in terms of schools relevance, in terms of cultural relevance, in terms of harmony with community. So based on these 3 separate comparative field research, we found that school-based management increased teachers' motivation and school effectiveness. Autonomy increased cultural relevance, ecological leadership, and programming. Teachers shifted from professional capital to community capital. So if teachers were gaining their professional learning as a self-learning or outside the school as a learning organization, they shifted toward the community capital. So from these findings, we can come up with the following conclusions and implications. We identified parameters of school-based management and school experiences in the use of this strategy in relation to pedagogic principles, organizational structures, teacher preparation, school autonomy in managing manpower and other resources, and extent of teachers' motivation. Significant positive correlation between school-based management and school effectiveness in terms of engagement in decision-making, middle school management, managing resources and manpower, access to resources, and organizational structure, and a kind of fluidity in organizational structure and not rigidity in organizational structure. Teachers enjoyed participation in decision-making to a large extent in schools employing school-based management, which increased their motivation, satisfaction, job commitment, and moving from professional capital to community capital. So within this understanding, we came up with the following calls. A call for revisiting centralized education system and structures toward a new shift of a new role of instructional support for schools. So schools will be seeking instructional support, but not a regime of control throughout superintendency and centralized education system. A call for reframing and redesigning in schools in terms of structure, pedagogy, and human diversity, especially in the current digital era. So if you want to, of course, dig deeper into this paper, some of were published and some not yet. So the first one is linking school-based management and school effectiveness. So this is one paper. The other one is a paper deal with school-based management in the Arab education system. And the other paper dealt with education in 2051, knowledge to technology to the rescue, adapting education means and process to diverse learner. And of course, my works with Alison TAYSUM, which, you know, throughout adaptation of participation, adaptation of action research and participation in school processes and practices, we saw that this affected students' well-being, teachers' well-being, and of course the learning outcomes in these schools. And of course, you can see in our recent edited books of TAYSUM and ARAR how different education system in the globe has been, you know, throughout case studies that we presented of schools who adopted this understanding of participation in school processes and practices, increased learning, well-being, and as Alison said, you know, throughout the ABC model, you can also further dig into our understanding of the needed shift. I think that my presentation aligns very well with the past presentation, which, you know, shed lights from a macro and across cultural and national level of research toward like inside digging into school systems and the shift and the change needed in order to mobilize our education systems, because we will be dealing with the following three realities nowadays. Scenario number one, we will say, we had a problem, it's called pandemic, and we get back to what we used to do. So this is scenario number one. Scenario number two, okay, there was a problem, we will need to refix and go farther with the same understanding And scenario number 3, there is a change has been, we have been facing a change here, and we need to revisit, rethink, reimagine our education system while adopting a lot of what has been done, especially in the digital area. This cannot be done without an ecological understanding and without decentralizing education systems, because we learned nowadays that the nations that has been able to move faster toward seeking, health base, they done this with ecological understanding and community participation in this understanding and community agency. So you cannot infuse and you cannot run things only in order without full cooperation of the bottom level of the system. So the understanding of upper bottom or top down, I think it has been re-examined. And the final note, we do need to seek interdisciplinarity, because an economist couldn't make decision nowadays. A scientist couldn't make decision nowadays. Within interdisciplinarity, we can gain a collective mindset and a collective agency and responsibility. Some nations done this better than others, and there is an opportunity to learn. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation. I know that I exceeded the time. Sorry, Mohammed.
Khalid, that's fine. That's totally fine. And I was waiting for you to complete. And I would appreciate if you could continue more, because I have just learned that we don't have our third presentation anymore. So I think basically we are done with the presentations. So unfortunately, Professor Charles Slater also are not able to make it. And thank you for this comprehensive presentation. We first had a presentation from Dr. Alison and then from Khalid ARAR, 2 different presentations, but as you said, it goes with each other very well. They have very strong common grounds. And now we are basically done with the presentation. So I would like to receive questions from the audience. If they have any question, they can write in Turkish. If they want to, I can translate into English for you. And they can, of course, write in English as well. Okay, they say wonderful presentation. They thank you. Any questions? Okay, so okay, it seems like there is no question for now, but I will have a question then, waiting for people to think about. Maybe they're writing their questions or they're thinking about still. So the thing that what we know from these 2 research topics, both are from US, and we know that the US education system is already decentralized. So I see that you're still having this discussion of centralization and decentralization. Whereas, the education system is already decentralized. Then what do you think there is extra need for decentralization, or there is a push from the government to centralize education system, and you see that seems to be dangerous to the local needs? So what's your idea about this?
Alison, you want to reflect on this first, or should I reflect to this first? What do you like?
Would you like to reflect first?
Okay. There are different structures and understanding of decentralization. You asked about the US. The US decentralized schools in a way while they hold them, under high stake tests. So they are not fully or totally decentralized, which means you will have a school improvement plan, a yearly school, annually school improvement plan you need to submit. You will be examined throughout this school improvement plan, and your students gonna take it to, like in Texas State, okay, they have the STAR exams, they have the TILBAS exams in the same year. So the schools are examined. And when they are examined, there are, tables of naming and shaming. So centralization, the system control is still there. The system's fingers on leading the schools is still there. Well, I've been trying to speak about decentralization while getting the understanding of leading school as a community institution, So, and I'm not bringing anything new. No, I'm going back to Dewey's experimental education and, all the new terms that we seems to think that they are new, school-based, project-based learning, and all this stuff, they have been found, since Dewey. But the nation state is not willing to give a community to lead, its education system towards a relevance. One of the points that Alison tapped on, if you look to the map of the United States, sometimes you find community diversity. Sometimes you find segregation. Sometimes you find of more Hispanics, less white, and a minority of Afro-American. If school is not leading for equity and diversity, and educational leaders move within this understanding while the community is there, and the educational leaders of school processes and practices while setting the policy, then education systems are failing, and they are exemplifying a regime of control, a regime of socialization, a regime of acculturalization. So this is and we saw this in the pandemic. Different states made decisions. They made decisions how we should, and they made different protocols for us how to behave. Without our full understanding and our full cooperation, it wouldn't be happen. So this is one. The second thing, and we have another paper, comparative paper about this, comparing 5 different nations. So mainly most of the states in the globe has been behaving as the following. One, the lockdown. So they have been locked down, whereas like the European Union, like a great union, has been locked down. No interfertilization. Nobody spoke with anybody. Nobody assisted anybody. So we came back to the national state as if. So what happened? Some of the states started to move towards giving community a kind of ecological, systematic control. Okay, you are community, I give you all the numbers, I give you all the knowledge needed, I give you all the support needed according to your request. you're gonna lead. You're gonna lead because you understand better how to lead. Without this cooperation, we will still struggling with the pandemic. So this understanding, when I take it to education system, it increases relevance. How? By not looking to students as control bodies, as Michel Foucault exemplified this, as control bodies that we want to socialize them according to the system. We want to free them and give them full participation in deciding their learning needs, their curriculum, and to be fully engaged in their society and community as active citizens. I hope I covered.
Thank you. Yeah, yes. The question, I think it interests everyone who are listening us, because what I see is a lot of participants are from Turkey. So we are, Khalid, the Turkish education system you're familiar with.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a very strong, strictly centralized education system. I think it's interesting for this audience to see that two researchers talking about the situation in US and asking for more autonomy, for more decentralization. Then it reminds me the education system in Turkey and how strongly it is centralized, and the need for decentralization in our system. So I think it will be even more urgent for the Turkish education system. And actually, we see some decision made by the Ministry of Education to give more power to local communities, so that they deal, especially during the pandemic, to deal with some issues that emerged locally. And this decision is totally supporting your argument here. Dr. Alison, do you want to say anything about this, or?
Just that I completely agree with Professor ARAR, and having worked with PhD students in Turkey, what I'm seeing in the US education system, and the data reveals that school boards, when they receive a report from their superintendent that says, in my role, I need improvement here, I need improvement here, because there are poverty gaps, there are achievement gaps between my students and students who are in the rural areas, because I'm in an urban area. Now, instead of school boards saying this is an honest person and they have the resources and the instructional learning to be able to develop this and develop community with the competencies they need to renew their local communities for growth after the COVID-19 tragedy that we're still recovering from, that they can propel their local entrepreneurial economies. Rather than doing that, the school boards will say, you're not good enough. You're saying you need improvement. Well, we'll get someone who's excellent. So what they'll do is they'll bring someone else in who doesn't understand the community. And they say, well, you look excellent on paper and you say you're doing excellently and you're ticking all the paperwork and all the boxes, but actually the poverty gaps are getting wider. And I think that there are some people that wish extra entitlement to be there. And that's reflected in my forthcoming book, Tanking the System, where I expose where the system is being tanked, which allow workers to get their fair pay and their fair rewards for doing a hard day's work, and work in the community to be able to translate their education to pathways to economic success and middle class benefits, with superintendents who are supported by school boards who want authentic improvement and don't just want people who say we're doing a good job, whilst the poverty gaps and achievement gaps with intersectionalities of class, race, gender, special educational needs and disability, and all the protected characteristics of the Equality Act. Unless we're narrow achievement gaps, we can't say that the superintendents and the education system is excellent. So I think what Khalid is saying is with reforms, to narrow the poverty gaps. And maybe PISA needs to start reporting on narrowing poverty gaps rather than league tables of who's got outstanding science, maths, and home language results.
All right, thank you. So I think I have another question, which is in Turkish. It says, so the change, the perception, the need for change that comes because of the pandemic and digitalization. So do you see the difference between East and West in terms of this need for change because of these two issues?
Is that to me or?
Well, it's to both of you, whoever wants to just say something. You can go first, Alison.
I think that there is a definite difference between East and West. And this is something that the Journal of Groundwork Cases and Faculty of Judgment has identified. And I think that we have a legacy from colonialism. And we have identified in chapter 6 of my book and in Khalid ARAR's recent edited book that since the white entitled people who used to own the oil moved out because the Middle East reclaimed that oil in their own countries, there was a colonization of Wall Street. And so there is still that generation of extra income of billionaires still developing. And I think what happened in the East was certainly in the Middle East, increased wars with Iraq and Iran. And Iraq went from being one of the cash richest countries in the world to one of the poorest. And we have a legacy of continual war. And I think that what we have at the moment is an absolutely desperate need for peace. But I think we can only have peace when we eradicate poverty, because how can you ask somebody to that they need to reach out to very rich people when they're starving? You know, if we want peace, then everybody needs to have a threshold level of a good life with food, with you know, a home, a family, being safe, being able to return to the home without it being destroyed. And I think that we have a legacy when we look at the Holocaust and the horrific things that happened to the Jews, how many countries stepped up to try and help the Jews to build a new world, a new life for peace after the atrocity of the Holocaust. And I think now we need to reach out and recognize that conflict and war must end everywhere. We must now learn that we need each other, and otherwise we're going to destroy this planet. We need now to come together how we can save it ecologically as a planet. And to do that, we cannot just blame people. We need to say this needs improvement in terms of pollution here. And just because this country is desperate for food and their way in the industrial strategy is more pollution, whilst cash-rich countries are maybe reducing their pollution because they can and they can still earn a high income, then we've got a poverty gap in terms of the possibility for people to achieve ecological sustainable development. So I just think we need to have a rethink about how this world is going to be sustainable, and everybody will be able to have enough food and everybody will be able to have a safe home. Because I think the diasporas and the migration from speaking to people who've had to leave their beloved home because of conflict or because it's not safe, they want to return and rebuild, but you can't return and rebuild to a place still at war. So my prayer and my plea from a humanitarian point of view is, please, can we work together and mobilize our education systems for grassroots up science with and for society, so that the people can speak and say, we need to start working for peace and prosperity and delivering sustainable development goals with interconnections, interdisciplinary networks across classrooms, across borders, so that we understand each other and build cultural capital of each other. So that's my position on your question. There is a gap between East and West, and we need to bridge it and eliminate it.
Yep, thank you. Thank you for the comment. And as we are running out of time, I would like to thing to the presenter. And here's our certificate that I wanted to share with you. And for the audience, for those who wants to get a certificate of participation, they need to fill out the participation form and the evaluation form so that they can get their certificate. All right. Thank you for listening to us, Dr. Alison and Professor Khalid. Thank you for your speeches and for your comments. Yep. Have a nice day.
I want to thank you also, Dr. Alison and Dr. Khalid ARAR. Thank you very much for your joining this conference and sharing your ideas, opinions, and vision with us. Thank you, friends. Burada bu oturumu kapatıyoruz. Çok teşekkür ederim herkese.
We will end this panel here. Thank you all very much.
Biz bu esnada Dr. Çağrılı'la iletişim kurmaya çalıştık ve onun
Professor Charles Slater.
Daha önce dün kurduğumuz iletişimden
after we communicated yesterday, we were not able to re-communicate today. I believe there was a misunderstanding, and Professor Portelli informed us that he was ill today. Therefore, we were not able to host two of our speakers today. Both Professor Portelli and Professor Slater wanted to share their presentations, and I'm sure that they will offer very invaluable advice and perspective. Thank you all so much. I will conclude the session here. But I would like to thank you all, to our panelists, and I believe that the chair, I will hand over the floor to the chair. Thank you so much, Mehmet. You were very kind in accepting our invitation.
With Sadat, I know Khalid is familiar with him, so I'm still tired. Yeah. But thank you for the invitation. Nice to meet you.
Eyvallah, çok memnun olduk. Gerçekten
we're happy to have you. And I'm so happy to have enjoyed this international conference in an online platform as well. We hope that we will be able to host you face-to-face in Turkey as well. Khalid and I are very good friends now, and we see each other very often, but we hope we will have Alison as well in Turkey.
For our next conference, we will be able, as in the past days, to meet face to face. Until then, please take good care of yourself and keep doing the good work that you are doing for your community and for your school system. And yeah, you are a capacity mobilizer. I have witnessed that. I have been witnessing, the growth of your vision. So well done, well done.
Çok teşekkür ederim Khalid. Gerçekten bunlar.
Thank you so much, Professor Khalid. My colleagues, my team, there are 100 team members involved, and they've been working very hard for this organization. And I would like to thank them all. We hold this conference once every 2 years. It's a biannual conference. We hope to convene again in 2023. We will have a new theme. I actually sent an email asking what the topic for the next conference should be. I hope we will decide on that in upcoming days. Thank you so much once again. And now for our second panel, I believe that Feyza will be here. Ayşegül, Ünal, Saraç, welcome. I see that you're here.
Öyle mi? Linki yeniden paylaşalım
Some
arkadaşlar.
have said that they're unable to access the form.
Tekrar doldurmaları gerekiyor mu hocam? Daha önceki katılımlardan doldurmuşlar galiba.
And participants are asking whether they have to fill out the form after each session.
Bir önceki oturum nasıl oldu?
Yes, please do fill out the form because we want feedback for each session. Yes, I understand it requires a bit effort on the part of the participants, but it is not obligatory.
Ayşegül Ünal Saraç hocamı
Ayşegül Ünal Saraç,
şimdi aldım sanıyorum.
I believe she just joined us.
Onun dışında diğer konuşmacılarıma bakıyorum.
Also, we have other panelists here. Let's see if they are here.
Bu oturumun yöneticisi
And
Metin
the moderator will be Metin Bayrak.
bir önceki oturumu.
Is
Ayşegül Hanım,
Metin Bayrak here now? Oh, we see that Ayşegül Ünal Saraç is here. Welcome.
biraz önce Feyza'yı da gördüm ama
I saw Feyza a second ago as well.
tamam. Şimdi diğer
And
konuşmacılara
our other panelists are Akif Pamuk.
özgür bırakabiliriz. Halit hocam.
Thank you, Mehmet and Khalid and Alison. You're free now.
Şimdi diğer konuşmacılardan gözümden kaçan var mı diye.
And I'm trying to check the list of panelists to see if everyone is here.
Diğeri Feyza,
Akif, Feyza, Cansu, Metin,
dördüncü kimdi Ayşegül hocam?
who was the fourth panelist.
Sesini alamadım.
You are muted.
Cansu, Feyza,
Cansu,
Akif
Feyza,
ve ben.
Akif, and I.
Siz konuşmacısınız. Metin.
The three of you
Evet
are
evet dört.
panelists.
Yani Akif Pamuk,
Akif Pamuk,
Cansu,
Cansu,
Feyza ve
Feyza,
ben 4 kişi
and
oluyoruz
I,
zaten.
four of us. We are the
Metin de
panelists.
moderatör.
And Metin will be the moderator.
Akif de girdi mi içeri?
Has Akif joined us?
Bakalım.
Can we check? Yes, he is here now. He is a panelist.
Bir dakikamız kaldı. Bir dakika içerisinde.
We have 1 minute left,
Evet Metin geldi galiba.
and I believe that Metin is here now.
Gördüm.
Cansu'yu da buldum. Merhaba. Tamam.
Hello.
Cansu'yu da
Great.
içeri alıyorum.
Let's admit Cansu now.
Cansu hoş geldin.
Welcome, Cansu.
Bir Akif kaldı. Akif'i
I
de
believe Akif
oturmadan başlayacağız.
is left. If we can find him, we can start the session.
Şimdi bir önceki oturumda
In the previous session, we had invited speakers. One of them had indicated that they were ill. And in this session, we have 4 panelists and 1 moderator. And now I'll leave the floor to you. And once Akif joins us, we will admit him as well. Your time has begun. Thank you so much for joining us. Are you certain? Shall we begin? There's actually a lot I could say now, but yes, of course. I believe you're good with words and you can begin. Thank you. Distinguished participants, welcome. And we hope that you'll able to join us in Turkey soon in ordinary circumstances. We hope that we will have them shortly. I'm Metin. And as Hakan has indicated, we held the first conference in 2019. We spoke about school architecture. It was an international conference. We talked about the structure of schools at the time. And the second is, of course, autonomy. It's another structure-related concept. We spoke about these 2 fundamental concepts. And just like in 2019, we talked about alternative pedagogy, alternative schools. And this year we're looking into autonomy from the perspective of alternative schools as well. So today we have 4 panelists here with us. I will try to moderate this panel. First, we will speak about the theoretical framework. We will lay that out. And secondly, our panelists will speak about the reflections of this. You can ask your answers in the chat box. We will answer them collectively at the end. And I believe we will have about 10 minutes in the second round, and we will try to solve them during that time. But these are major topics, as you know, and they are very vast topics, but we will at least get a taste of them during this panel. And there will be symbols, metaphors, questions that we can discuss. If we can achieve this, we will be very pleased. I'd like to quickly introduce the panelists. Akif Pamuk is from Marmara University. Ayşegül Ünal Saraç is from Altıncı Preschool. Cansu Kaygusuz is from Alternatif Eğitim, and Feyza Eyikul is from another association called Another Type of School is Possible. Now let's speak of the theoretical framework of schools and autonomy. And I would try to clarify this foundation for you all.
Sayın Hocam, Akif Bey henüz katılmadılar.
Akif hasn't joined the meeting yet, unfortunately. Apologies. Then until he joins, we will have Ayşegül.
Başlıyorum ben de.
Okay, then I'll start
Merhaba,
quickly.
ben uzman psikoloğum aynı
Hello,
zamanda.
I'm also
eğitim
a
yaklaşımlarıyla 9 yıldır haşır neşirim ve aynı zamanda Reggio Emilia Eğitim ve Araştırmaları Derneği Başkanıyım. Geçen yıl da yine mekansal tasarımlar adına böyle bir konferansta birlikteydik. Aslında öyle güzel bağlantısı var ki, hani benim açımdan bağlantısı var. Çünkü mekanın tasarımı zaten aynı zamanda özerkliği destekliyor. Ona zaten ilerleyen aşamalarda geleceğim. Ama ben bir erken çocukluk eğitimcisiyim. Zaten işte Altınçağ Anaokulları kurucusuyum. Dolayısıyla ben özerklik işine çok erken yaşta başlıyor olmak kısmındayım. Okul çerçevesinde baktığımız zaman da. Dolayısıyla çocukların belki 0-6, hani belki 3-6'dan itibaren özerk olmalarıyla ilgili o özerklik kavramı işte erken çocukluk yıllarında ne ifade ediyor? Biraz ondan bahsetmek istiyorum. Çocuklar daha bağımsız hale geldikçe dünyayı kendi başlarına keşfederler ve kendilerini nasıl ifade edeceklerini anlarlar. Ve çocukların bir benlik duygusu geliştirmelerine yardımcı olmak için erken çocukluk döneminde özerklik teşvik edilmelidir diye inanıyorum. Zaten inandığım ve bağlı bulunduğum alternatif eğitim yaklaşımı da bunu çok fazla destekliyor. Erken çocukluk eğitimiyle ilgili özerklik, çocuklara kendileri ve yaptıkları seçimler üzerinde kontrol sahibi olduklarını bilmelerini sağlamak anlamına gelir. Katıldıkları etkinlik, yani bu o kadar geniş ve derin bir anlam ki aslında bunu tarif ederken içeride çocukların özerkliği ya da sınıfın özerkliği adına çok fazla bileşen var. Yani katıldıkları etkinliklerden nasıl oynadıklarına, akranlarıyla nasıl iletişim kurduklarına kadar özerklik bir çocuğun sınıfta yaptığı her şeyde rol oynar. Nasıl bağımsız olacağını öğrenmek okul öncesi çocukları için ve onların gelişimi için çok kritik bir beceridir. Çünkü onlara daha sonraki yaşamlarında daha büyük sorumluluklar üstlenirken nasıl davranacaklarını öğrenirler. Peki, özerklik bir çocuğun gelişimini nasıl etkiler? Çok erken yaştan başlıyor özerklikle. O pencereden bakmaya. Bir defa kontrolde hissetmek. Çocukların güven inşa etmek için hayatlarının tüm yönleri üzerinde olmasa bile belirli bölümleri üzerinde kontrol sahibi olduklarını hissetmeleri gerekir. Bunu konuşmamın ikinci bölümünde çok daha iyi bir şekilde açacağım. Yine çocukların neden özerk olmaları gerekir? Devam ediyorum. İkinci altını çizeceğim nokta. Benlik saygısını artırmak. Bir çocuk kontrolün kendisinde olduğunu ve kendi seçimlerini yapabileceğini hissettiğinde bu onun özgüvenini artırır. Kişinin kendi başına bir şeyler yapabilmesi bir başarı duygusunu besler. Zaten bu özerklik adına baktığımız zaman aslında bu söylediklerimizle okul ortamlarını bir taraftan kafanızda canlandırıyor olmanızı da çok isterim. Yani şu andaki süreçlerimiz bunu uygun mu değil mi oraya bakmak gerekiyor. Ve bu çocukların özerkliğinin desteklenmesinin aslında ne kadar önemli olduğunun hani bence ve yine bağlı bulunduğum alternatif yaklaşımda çok önemli bir nokta bilişsel büyüme sağlaması. Yani bir çocuk kendi seçimlerini yaptığında problem çözüyor demektir. Anlamlı seçimler yapmak, kendilerine sunulan seçimler aracılığıyla düşündükçe büyüyen bilişsel gelişimin bir parçasıdır. Yani tam da öğrenme ve tam da öğrenmedeki özerkliğin sağlanıyor olması aslında arkasından çocuk için bir sürü faydayı getiriyor. Bir çocuğu özerk olmaya nasıl teşvik ederiz kısmında daha genel çerçevede bakıyoruz bunu. Çünkü sınıfta özerkliği teşvik etmeye başlamanın yolları üzerinde kısaca duruyor olduktan sonra ikinci konuşmamda bunların iç açılımlarını yapıyor olacağım. Bir tanesi teklif seçenekleri. Yani çocukların kendi seçimlerini yapmalarına izin vermek özerkliği teşvik etmenin ilk adımıdır. Şimdi geleneksel sınıf sistemlerine bakacak olursak bizim zaten işte çocukların seçemedikleri müfredat konularımız var. Çocukların seçemedikleri öğrenme biçimleri var. Çünkü her çocuğun yapısı başka, öğrenme biçimi başka. Dolayısıyla hani teklif seçeneklerimiz ne zaman daha hangi ortamlarda yapılabilir bunu konuşuyor olacağız. Dolayısıyla çocuğun o etkinlik ve etkinliği yapış ve öğreniş biçimi seçimi o teklifi mutlaka alması çok değerli. Şu görüşlere saygı. Bu başka özerkliği çok destekleyecek ve olması gereken aslında sınıf ortamlarında ve ben hani sadece okul öncesinden bahsediyorum aslında. Yani okul öncesi çocukları için bile çocukların görüşlerinin ne kadar saygın olduğunu hissediyor olmaları ki bunun arka planı onların zaten görüşlerine değer vermek, işte onları dinlemek ki onların zaten öngördükleri pek çok konu eğer onları dinleyip de geri bildirim verdiğimiz zaman zaten o saygıyı hissedecekler. Bir de hayatın içinden görevler. Bunların da yine sınıf içerisinde gerçek sorumluluklar vererek sağlıyor olmak olacak. Aslında bu üç başlığı yani hayatın içinden görevler, görüşlere saygı ve teklif seçenekleri bunun üçünü de kapsayan bir öğrenci ve öğretmen özerkliği ve sınıf özerkliğinin içinde kendimizi hissetmeliyiz diye düşünüyorum. Belki açılımı da sonraki adımlarda yapacağım. Arkadaşlarımın zamanını almamak adına kısa bir toparlama yaptım.
Of your time or my colleagues' time, but we will get into all of that later. Thank you, Ayşegül. And I am the reason why Akif couldn't participate in the meeting earlier. Now, we've drawn up a theoretical framework, and we hope to create a discussion that we would wish to build up from that framework. But now we will have Akif. He will deliver his own presentation and he will have his own framework. Hello, everybody. My name is Akif Pamuk. I'm from the Marmara University and Faculty of Medicine. I'm a faculty member. And I would like to thank all of our panelists here. And Ayşegül Hanım also mentioned in the previous conference, we've talked about the design of environments. And this is something that's highly important to me because this basic framework provides a different perspective to the concept of autonomy, as we all know. And this effect that shapes our modern learning models and school systems is highly prevalent. And in my presentation,
Recording in progress.
Aynı buradaki eğitim söylemi, modern eğitim söylemi aynı zamanda diyor ki biz öyle becerilerle yetiştireceğiz ki bu beceriler biricik ve tek olacaktır diyor. Bütün kuramsal çerçevede de öğrenciler biriciktir, tektir, onları sevelim gibi bir çerçeveden yaklaşıyor. Halbuki bırakın öğretim programının içeriğini tanımlamayı, çocuk hakları bile çocukların haklarının ne olduğunu söyleyen bir özerklik karşıtı bir otoriteden bahsediyoruz. Şimdi
we are talking about an authority that is so against autonomy that they infringe upon the rights of children even. So if we were to hold this conference 2 years ago, we would have been talking about the design of the environment and how the design creates a perspective within the minds of the children. We would have been talking about the investments and 21st century skills. And last January, we would be saying to our children to not sit too closely in front of the television. But now, what we're saying is that, my child, please don't move from in front of the television. Please don't neglect your online courses that you attend using your computer or the television. That's what we now say. So this design is heavily centralized and this, in a sense, hypocritical. And I'm using this word figuratively, but this is something like a prerequisite of ensuring centralization. And this is the role of technology in our world today. So, a centralized education system that has been well planned, well thought out. Can it be autonomous? Ayşegül Hanım will also be talking about this, or the example of the alternative schools, or the examples that Cansu will talk about. We will be examining this, and we will be talking about teachers, academics, influencers. All of these people have to be inspired from autonomy. Autonomy is more than simply autonomy. Thank you. And thank you, Akif. Akif used a very thought-provoking phrase while designing this panel. He said that autonomy in a school environment is an oxymoron. So we will have Feyza's presentation now. She will have a very different perspective. And now I give the floor to you, Feyza. Yes, I have a much different perspective, and I will be talking about the experience rather than the oxymoron, as Akif talked about. Now, I can't speak for all schools or all democratic schools, because these democratic schools, as we call them, have only 3 to 5 criteria in mutual. So they are wildly different, but they are situated within the same framework of democracy. But one of the axes of democratic management, a model that is tailored towards Turkey, başka bir okul mümkün association is the name of our initiative. And a school in Bodrum, one of the first schools that our association founded. I will be talking about how it began, how it continued, and how it ended. Now, we are a group of people that gathered about 10 years ago, and having democracy and instilling democracy in children and having democracy be a core principle in their education was one of our main focuses. And the thing that we believed in was the fact that children were able to make their own decisions. And we thought about how could we inspire autonomy in schools. And we decided on having a system where the children are participants of the decision-making processes that have to do with their experience in the schools. And we talked about establishing a management mechanism. And we also talked about how establishing such a mechanism would be impossible. And the framework that Akif created for us is very valuable, I believe. But at the same time, in practice, in our daily lives, if we don't have managers that are putting pressure on us, then we are relatively more free. And while working with children and working with their autonomy, making sure that they make their own choices and participating in decision-making processes proves to be challenging for us. And why is that? It has a highly practical reason, because the reason is that we have never experienced autonomy, even in infancy, I don't think. So in all processes where we figure out what's right by trial and error, or being dictated what's right, or being shown what we did wrong, these are the ways that we learn. These are the ways that we discover the world around us. And this is our approach in adulthood as well. So moving away from that and thinking about an autonomous learning environment and an autonomous learning system is nothing short of a miracle, basically. So thinking critically, self-reflection, and learning from your experiences. All of these require a huge deal of effort, but these are also necessary, as well as courage. I would like to juxtapose that with autonomy because people trust in what they know. People and they fear what's unknown. So an unfamiliar learning environment will not do. So we need to have safe learning environments, peaceful learning environments, devoid of violence, and looking into ways and tools of creating such learning environments. This is what we must do. And I say this with sadness, but we are experiencing an environment, we are experiencing an existence where instead of peace, wars and conflicts and turmoil is being promoted at the moment. So we are in need of environments that promote peace, although I haven't had the opportunity thus far. But in essence, what I would like to say that as people, we need autonomy. It is a deeply rooted need of the human experience. Only then we can truly exist as a whole. Because if you don't have one of your needs met, then it will be difficult to meet the others. So autonomy is a prerequisite of learning, but also a familiar environment and easily applicable methods. These are the things that we know. And this is the challenge of how do we break our chains? How do we make this thing happen? These are some of the things that I will be talking about in the second round. Thank you, Feyza. Living is something that can be done only by the optimists. So you've pointed out something that is very valuable. Concept of peace, communication without violence. And our concepts and our budgets and our efforts for peace are non-existent. So creating new experiences, creating new situations and opening new routes are highly important, but also highly necessary. Now, we will have Cansu and she will talk about autonomy within the framework of Waldorf.
Hello, everyone. I'm a board member, and I would like to look at the perspective of school autonomy. I believe that just as Aytaç said, I looked at the concept of autonomy based on the literature of education, and they always speak of globalization and the need for training qualified individuals. This is the perspective we adopt, and we speak of improving the quality of schools, but with respect with Waldorf schools, over hundreds of years, they have been renowned as independent schools. This is because they are the leaders of this system say that individuals who are self-sufficient can only be fostered through independent schools, and this is how they structure the entire school system. So yes, it is established upon pedagogy. It's based on the hand, heart, and brain, and them working in harmony. The brain here correspond to teachers, the heart corresponds to coordinators, and the organs correspond to families. Now, with respect to teachers, they have a full grasp of the entire school, but they are in essence responsible for the pedagogy of the schools. And they focus on the qualities of their own schools and the needs of their own students. They have weekly, monthly, and yearly education programs that they implement. Now, in essence, I believe that the teacher should be able to work on their self-development on their own, and they put in a lot of effort into this in order to meet the needs of the children. And the teacher needs to become qualified in all areas. They need to be independent within themselves first. Now there are seminars oriented towards teachers, and there are mentors as well. Whenever teachers need, they can receive support from their mentors. But I believe what's most important is that teachers form unions within the schools, and they hold weekly meetings. During these meetings, there are pedagogical readings that are done, but also there are problems that remain unresolved within the classroom. And they speak with their other colleagues and receive support both mentally and emotionally. Now, with respect to pedagogy, it's not an area in which parents and guardians can intervene directly. If support is requested, then families and coordinators can intervene. However, the teachers have to shoulder the entire responsibility, and they have their own independent area. Now, with respect to coordinators, maybe you might expect me to say administrators. However, everyone works within their own area of expertise, and that's why the term administrator does not fit. They are responsible for finances, for coordination within the school, and the entire regulation of the school system. There are support personnel. It could be the coordination of them, or it could be the coordination of families, other groups of teachers, whatever the school needs. They establish the collaboration and cooperation that's needed, and this is what the coordinators do. Now, the families, in this regard, they represent the society. They are the gate to society. And whenever a school needs a resource, it could be human labor, it could be another financial resource, but the families are responsible for this. For example, if the school has financial needs, they can hold a fundraiser and they can contribute to the school as well. Now, parents and guardians also need to gain strength in the area of pedagogy as well, because they want to, we are aware that parents want to be aware of this topic, and the empowerment of parents and guardians is important because it will contribute to their own fields as well. Also, it also strengthens the trust bond. And I think what sets aside these Waldorf schools is their financing. In order to establish these schools, the only prerequisite is that they are not profit oriented. And so some parents and teachers come together and they try to establish a system that will benefit their students. Of course, finances are not discussed at this point. And children from all parts and all factions of society come together. And those who are not so well off, they contribute whatever services they can if they cannot provide financing. And this helps establish justice and equality. Of course, the salaries of coordinators are very openly and transparently discussed, and an environment of trust is established in this way. By doing so, we can establish trust, and individuals do become sufficient when they graduate from the system. Thank you so much, Cansu. Now that was our first round, and we talked about our main themes. In our second round, we will continue. Akif, you can have the microphone now. Now, Metin was talking about oxymorons. Why do we create an oxymoron of this kind? Now, conceptually speaking, why do we speak of a centralized structure? It's a form of authority that we see. Why do they delegate authority? This is a very clear concept. It's not supposed to happen. And when this does occur, a problem arises. And in order to solve that problem, we cannot just focus on existing responses because they became obsolete. Now, in this respect, we see that this process is actually, of course, there's a pedagogical aspect. There's the velvet gloves that we speak of. I always touch upon this with respect to the historical process. For example, when there were uprisings in the Ottoman period, and they sent soldiers to suppress and quell those uprisings. And sometimes they'll say, oh, let's make so-and-so the governor of a certain area, and some will protest. Of course, this is what creates the oxymoron in this respect is modernity tries to, it's a very clear design actually. It's an industrial society, there are workers, there is the conceptual framework of education that advocates that everything will be better. All students will go to school, everyone will be literate, everyone will complete their higher education, they will have better education. This is the myth that is prevalent, and maybe it's in a criticism of positivism, and the reflections in pedagogy are now unanswerable. And now I gave an historical example as well, because we need to create an area. There are constantly recurring instances, and there are stereotypical instances in which this happens. There are archetypes that are recurring. Of course, they are criticized. Who and what determined these developments? So when you view it from this perspective, you see that centralized structures, especially in schools, they need space to maneuver, because currently the current discourse in practice has certain objects and certain agencies that's in need of, and they cannot just reiterate what everyone needs. What needs to happen is they are expected to be creative, to produce, to create new solutions, because this is what life requires. And that's why we can speak of partial autonomy. That is what we mean. There's a social constructivist perspective that we can speak of. Positivism is criticized. Thomas Crew is criticized. He says there are truths, there are other epistemic societies, all sorts of things. The reflections in the school perspective are as follows. Three of us here have experience in practice. What type of parent guardian profile would bring their children to alternative schools? I have experienced until this day, when I've compared my past experience, is that those who have not received higher education do not usually do that. Of course, there are some that there are individuals who have reached certain standards and they say that we don't want our children to be a part of this system, and they envision a different kind of experience in order to achieve that. In order for them to become agents, we believe there's another form of school that is possible. This is a social constructivist approach, and it's very intertwined. So in essence, what it means is that this oxymoron is mandatorily accepted, and it is how their school does not overlap with reality, which is why we are forced to discuss this today. Because in this regard, we see that there are the dynamics of capitalism as well. So in the 21st century, skills are not in a clear framework. School and education is lagging behind. It's falling behind life itself. This is because all of modern education is focused on needs analysis. Well, the needs of today, actually, we design according to the needs of the past, not today, and we're trying to keep pace with these changing needs because we're speaking of a fluid and disintegrated identity. And maybe there are hundreds of different interpretations of one issue, so we need to address this. Or why should students be involved in the decision-making process then? Because the system is clogged now. Capitalism wants startups. Capitalism wants more creativity. It requires more creative agents because it is clogged. So what happens now? What we speak of in terms of autonomy is actually not authentic. This, of course, is an outcome. We need to attach importance to these as well. There are two extremes. On one end, we have schools. On the other hand, we have no schools. And of course, there are also alternative schools. Now, there are mandatory school practices within this area. They allow for areas of to maneuver freely. For example, autonomy is not often discussed, but in alternative schools it is constructed because every time when the teacher enters the classroom, they create this language together with the students, or else, even if they cover the same topics, they see that there are different experiences in different classrooms, such as A, B, C. But I will wrap up briefly. But in today's social engineering, we see that this is the jargon. We need to be a bit more independent because this is the need of today's society. We cannot expect the government to solve everything. We need to be more entrepreneurial. We see that this is the case in all countries. It's not just Turkey. Everyone wants this as well, the students, the teachers. We want to be solution-oriented and we want it to occur right away. However, the system has come to a halt and we want new colors. We want new solutions. And now, as I wrap up, I'd like to say that autonomy is experienced in families that do not have schools. That's where they begin. Let's say you enter history class and you talk about the era before and after writing. Can we speak of autonomy in this regard? Can we speak of rationality, of cause and effect? There are historical concepts, of course. Maybe the student is not even interested. We even provide the chronological developments. There are alternative schools on one end, and they allow you to practice this. It's also can be seen as a tool in this regard. So the agent, the student, they can establish a connection with life, and that's what alternative schools are for a diploma, for a profession, due to future concerns. It is a topic of debate, and convention is also often discussed. We see that over and over again. Our new system is 4 + 4, and we also have PhDs added to that, and we see that by that time, students are 32, 38 years old. From Istanbul to Ankara, if you fly, it takes about 45 minutes. So your experience will last 45 minutes. But if you try to go by bike, it may take 3 days. If you try to walk, it will be a whole different kind of experience. So in terms of autonomy, for agents, it offers a real life experience. Thank you so much, Akif. And what the education that we define as modern, we have to, when doing so, we have to think of
farklı ürünleri satın alabilecek, tercih edebilir becerilere tırnak içinde sahip olması.
And that's why.
Şimdi evet biraz daha deneyime doğru yoğunlaştığımızda Reggio'da bu bağlamda biraz
focus more on experience.
Şimdi şöyle başlamak istiyorum. Akif Hocam dedi ki özerklik söylemeyle olmaz, inşa edilir dedi. Tam da böyle ve bugün ben çok net bir şekilde şunu görebiliyorum. Mesela bugün lise öğrencilerine hani bırakın üniversiteyi, özel bir eğitim şansı verilse ben çocukların artık o saatten itibaren özel olabileceklerini düşünmüyorum. Çünkü özerklik bir karar verme, bir seçenekler arasında kendine ait en doğru şeyi bulabilme, bir kendi öğrenme sürecini kendi yönetebilme becerisi ve zaten bunu hani anaokulu hadi bilemedik ilkokul. Orayı geçtiyse zaten artık olamaz. Ben bir psikolog olarak baktığım zaman bile mesela çocuklara seçme hakları ile ilgili işte bir seçenek sunduğum zaman çocuk seçemiyor. Yani daha anaokulunda seçemiyorken zaten onu da ilerleyen aşamalarda hiç seçemez. O yüzden de zaten bunun gerçekten inşa edilmesi gerekiyor. Ben Reggio'daki inşa kısmına böyle çok hızlı cümlelerle veriyor olacağım. Ben buna Reggio kısmından bakacağım. Eminim diğer tüm alternatif yaklaşımlar da çok değerlidir. Ama ben hani Reggio diyerek ilerliyorum. Kusura bakmayın öyle. Şimdi Reggio'da hakikaten özerkliğin yolculuğu çok değerli. Çünkü Reggio zaten temelde çocuğun imajını çok yüksek tutarak zaten özerkliğe yol açıyor. Yani çocuğu zaten yetkin görüyor. Çocuğun kendi bilgisini inşa edebilen bir varlık olduğunu görüyor ve çocuğa kendi öğrenmesini seçme hakkı veriyor. Bu çok büyük bir hak. Yani o kadar büyük bir hak ki Reggio'yu tanımadan önce ben hani bunun mümkün olabileceğine asla inanmıyorum. Kendim de zaten geleneksel yaklaşımdan ilerlemiş birisi olarak. Ama işte çocuklara çok erken yaşta böyle haklar verildiği zaman çocuklar aslında zaten meraklarıyla kendi öğrenme süreçlerini başlatabiliyorlar. Ama biz onlara dayatma müfredatlarla bir şekilde onu engelliyoruz, yok ediyoruz. Zaten Reggio'nun özerkliğindeki en temel bileşen çocuklara öğrenme haklarını, kendi öğrenme biçimlerini seçme haklarını vermiştir. Dolayısıyla Reggio bu ortaya çıkan yaklaşımında yaklaşık 50 yıldır müfredatı okulun, hatta daha doğrusu öğretmenin yönetmesi gibi çok ciddi bir özerklik veriyor. Yani bugün Reggio sınıflarında, işte bir okulda 10 tane Reggio sınıfı varsa tamamen öğretmenin özerkliğinde, asla bir müfredata bağlı kalmaksızın çocuğun özerkliğinin peşinden giderek öğretmen çocukların meraklarından müfredat veriyor. Ve baktığınız zaman o öğretmenin tamamen kendine özgü bir özerklik ve müfredat biçimi var. Ve bunu kazanabilmek için tabii ki arka planda çok ciddi eğitimler gerekiyor. Yani ben şunu hani hakikaten altını çiziyorum. Eğer erken yaşta çok bilinçli bir şekilde özerk olmayı öğrenemiyorsak zaten daha ileriki yaşlarda maalesef bunu uygulamaya düşmek inanın mümkün değil hiçbir şekilde. O yüzden de çocukların kendi öğrenme süreçlerini, işte kendi karar verme ilişkilerini, arkadaşlarıyla ilişkilerini bir şekilde kendilerini yönetecekleri ortamların yaratabilmesi gerekiyor. Ki çocuğun yetkin bir öğrenci olarak ilk önermesinde mantıksal olarak akan şey öğrenme yaklaşımını yöneten temel ilkelerdir. Çocuk kendi öğrenmesinin birinci mimarıdır. Ve bunu zaten kendi öğrenme biçimiyle, ki Reggio Emilia'da mesela çocuğun yüz dili diye bunu ifade ediyor. İşte bir çocuk İşte çizerek öğreniyor, bir çocuk hareketle öğreniyor. Aslında aynı şey, mesela aynı matematiği işte kimi hareket eğitimiyle öğrenirken çocuk onu kendi seçiyor. Yani hani pek çok yüz dili kullanarak seçebiliyor ve bu bir süre sonra zaten çocuğun bu kendini ifade etme yolları ile çocuk hem daha çok bağımsızlaşıyor hem daha çok duygularının farkında oluyor. Ve burada Reggio bunu nasıl veriyor? Bunu çok temel böyle birkaç bana 3 dakika verdiğiniz için çok hızlıca gidiyorum. Şimdi birincisi çocuğa güvenerek. Yani bir öğrenciye gerçek özerklik teklif etmek demek, o zaten bunun farkında olmayacak. Yalnızca bir şeyleri merak edecek. Biz onun merak ettiği şeyi dinleyerek, onun merakıyla ilgilendiğimizi hissettirerek, ona değerli sorular sorarak zaten ona özelliği hediye ediyoruz zaten başlangıçta. Ve çocuk orada o değerliliği hissettiği zaman bu sefer kendi sürecini yönetmeye başlıyor ve biz bunu Reggio sınıflarımızda çok yoğun bir şekilde yaşıyoruz. Yani çocuk bu sefer geliyor, o merak ettikleri ve düşüncelerinin ne kadar değerli olduğunu bu sefer artık bunu alışkanlık kazanarak ifade etmeye çalışıyor. O yüzden de mesela tehlikeli bir takım malzemeler kullanırken de, işte risk alınması gerekirken de aslında her şeyde çocuğa güvenmek var. Hani bırakın çocuğun kendi öğrenmesini, seçmenin kısmını. Dolayısıyla çocuğa güvenmekle özerklik başlıyor. Ve biz çocuğu izlediğimiz zaman çok büyülü yolculuklara gidiyoruz ama ben burada sonlandırayım.
What you feel is truly magical, and that would be my last remark. But it is a long journey. Thank you, Ayşegül. I feel that the metaphor of a journey is very apt because this ideology basically thrives on turning children into tools. And all of this revolves around this concept, and all components involved in this process do their parts in trying to turn children into tools, and our children are thus morphed, turned into something else altogether. Now, a small reminder to my colleagues, please write your questions, please type them in, and we hope to be releasing yet another edition of Alternative School magazine, and we will be answering your questions in there. So what we talked about may be forgotten, but what we write will be remembered forever. So moving on, what say you, Feyza? So to build our hopes, I believe what I can say is that we should let children be children. Akif opened up a world of possibilities for us in terms of discussion, in terms of classes in Turkey, privileges, or whether these privileges that we see them are really privileges. So academy is lagging behind when it comes to children and autonomy. And we see that children are under more pressure than other groups in our society. So the question of what is very important, I believe, in terms of autonomy. And I would like to also emphasize that autonomy is not something that can be taught. So we have no business teaching children autonomy, but on the contrary, we must create environments, and it is the duty of adults to create environments where children can be autonomous, because every person has the right to shape their own environment and manage their own lives. And if we don't include them within the processes, if we're not doing it to protect them from harm, then that constitutes a violation of their rights. Now, I'm not a parent, but I have many children that I'm working with or working for, so I have had to observe a lot. And what we see is that we're talking as if we've provided children a very free life, but we haven't done that. Please look around you. How can you believe that children can choose what they want to learn and how they want to learn it? So this has to do with modernity, this has to do with capitalism, and has to do with our perception of children that pervades ever since the Industrial Revolution. Is something that we often think. But this is a misconception. They're their own beings. They experience things differently. But these differences